solve a problem on construction of signal flow graph from a given block diagram. We will understand some particular points regarding conversion of this block diagram into signal flow graph. So while construction of signal flow graph, we have to replace some important points from the block diagram with single node. So which are those points? So we have to take input signal as a single node. So when this block diagram is getting started with input signal, so I will mark here that this is the first point that we have to remember. We have to convert this input signal with a single node. Then output signal we have to convert it into single node. Then all the summing points. So whenever there are summing points, we have to convert it into node. So this is the third point. Then all takeoff points. So takeoff points in the block from the block diagram, we have to convert it into single node. That is the fourth point. Now next is, suppose one after other there are two summing points or two takeoff points, or one summing point and one takeoff point with unity gain. Now what is the meaning of unity gain? That is, in between these two summing points or two takeoff points, or in between summing point and takeoff point, there is no any block. So we will consider that there is the unity gain. So whenever there is the branch connecting two summing point, two takeoff point, or one summing point and takeoff point with unity gain, so we can combine these points and we will consider here the single node. So this is the fifth important point. That is, with unity gain we will have to consider the 2 points as a single node. Then the last one is 2 or more takeoff points from same signal. So suppose there are 2 or more takeoff points from the same signal, then also we have to combine it and we have to consider there as a single node. So this is 6th important point. So these 6 points we have to remember while construction of the signal flow graph. Now here is the question. Now we will apply all these rules for this question. So here is the question. Now if we observe, this R of S is nothing but the input signal. So we have to consider this as a single node. So I will give here the node number. So for this R of S, we will say that this is node 1. Then there is the summing point. But if we observe, in between these two summing points there is no any block. That means the branch connecting the two summing point is having unity gain. So we will combine these two summing points and we will consider this as a single node, and I will give here the number, that is node 2. Now next is, again there is the summing point and after that there is the takeoff point, and in between the summing point and takeoff point there is no any block. That means we will consider here the branch connecting summing point and takeoff point is having unity gain, and we will combine these two and we will consider here the next node, that is node 3. Now next, in between block G2 and G3 there is takeoff point. So for this takeoff point we have to consider again one single node. I will consider here as a node 4. Now if we move next, there is summing point, and after at this summing point there is also takeoff point. So we have to take here the different takeoff point because the given question is that here is the takeoff point. So here after this summing point there is takeoff point, and in between summing point and takeoff point no any block is there. That means the branch connecting summing point and takeoff point is having unity gain. Now at this takeoff point, if we observe, here are two paths. that are moving to the backward. That means we can say that we have to combine this summing point and two takeoff points, and we will consider here as a single node. So I will consider here as a node 5. And for the output signal is C of S. We have to consider here as a separate single node, that is I will consider here the node 6. That means for this block diagram we have to take total number of nodes is equal to 6. Now we have to show for this signal flow graph. So we will consider for the 6 nodes, that is we will take total number x1, x2, x3 up to x6, indicating these nodes. So first I will say that x1, then second x2, then third x3, fourth x4, fifth x5, and last one is nothing but 6x6. So these are the nodes. Now we have to join these nodes with forward path. Now if we observe, this is the path from input signal to the output signal, and all these paths are the forward paths. So we will join all these paths indicating this forward arrow. Again this x1 indicating the input signal. Now for this x2, this is the combination of the two summing point. Now in between this node 2 and node 3 there is G1, that is this gain G1. So we have to show in between x2 and x3 there is G1. Then in between x3 and x4 again there is G2. So in between x3 and x4 we have to show G2. Now in between node 4 and node 5 there is gain G3. So we have to show here as a gain G3. So these are the gains for this forward path. Now we will observe what are the forward path and feedback path, and we will indicate those paths. So this point is important. So for that we have to observe which are the takeoff points and summing points. Now for this diagram, first takeoff point is in between the G2 and G3. That means at node 3 there is the takeoff point, and this is the forward path. Now if we observe, this path is forward indicating gain G4, and it meets at node 5. So these nodes are important. So from x3 to x5 there is G4. So for that I have to combine this x3 and x5 indicating arrow, and what is gain? Gain is G4. So this takeoff point is considered as node 3. This summing point is considered as node 5. So 3 to 5 here is G4. That point is clear. Now next. Now again if we observe at this node 4 there is the takeoff point. That is node 4, that means x4. There is the takeoff point. But here is the feedback path. Now feedback path is from node 4 to node 2. This summing point is considered as node 2. So node 4, that is x4 to x2, we have to join the feedback path indicating h1 as a gain. That means here h1, that is there is minus sign for the feedback path, so we have to write here minus h1. So x4 to x2, and we have to write here as a minus h1. Again if we observe, from this node 5 there are two feedback paths. Now from this node 5, that means x5 to x3, that is at node 3. x5 to x3 we have to take minus h2 because here minus sign is given. So we have to write x5 to x3. And minus h2, that we have to take. Now again at the node 5 there is, this is also the takeoff point from this node 5 towards node 2. So 5 to 2 we have to connect, and for that means we have to consider here as a unity, and for this unity there is minus sign. So from this node 5 I will connect with node 2 and I will give here as a minus 1. So this is the diagram, that is nothing but the signal flow graph.